Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanishalaakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudirayet. In this session, we will be discussing from the 55th verse of the 13th chapter of the first canto Srimad Bhagavatam. Vijnana Atmani Samyojya Kshetragne Pravilapyatam Brahmani Atmanam Adhare Ghatambaram Ivambare. The meaning of this verse is Dhritarashtra will have to amalgamate his pure identity with intelligence and then merge into the Supreme Being with knowledge of his qualitative oneness as a living entity with the Supreme Brahman. Being freed from the blocked sky, he will have to rise to the spiritual sky. This is a typical philosophical verse in the Bhagavatam, which also is explaining the Vedanta philosophy. So, what is that philosophy that's being explained here is simplified by Srila Prabhupada in the purport. So, basically in the verse, it is explaining how the Ashtanga Yoga system of practice is ultimately meant for liberation from material bondage. And how that liberation happens technically is being explained to some extent in this verse. So, Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, the living being, by his desiring to lord it over the material world and declining to cooperate with the Supreme Lord, contacts the sum total of the material world. Let me go a little slow and let us try to understand what Srila Prabhupada is telling here. Each one of us is living being, and the characteristic of every living being is the living being has the capacity or the ability to desire. Desire is integral with the existence as spirit soul. So you cannot be without desire at any stage, in any condition, in any place, in any situation. Any person cannot be desireless. So, specifically a certain type of desire. What is that desire? To lord it over the material world. I want to be the Lord. Now, who is the Lord? Actually, Krishna. Krishna is eternally the Lord of the material world, the spiritual world, and the whole existence. That is Krishna's position. Our position is never to be the Lord. But if we develop a desire to be the Lord, and as a result of desiring to be the Lord, what happens next? We decline to cooperate with the Supreme Lord. If we don't have the desire to lord it over material nature, then we act in our constitutional position, in our original state, as loving, devotional servant of Krishna. So we are happily situated, completely, blissfully, nicely engaged in Krishna's service as a cooperator. Krishna never forces in the spiritual world anyone to serve him because he is not in need of service. It's for our own self-interest that we must serve Krishna. But how is the service rendered? Lovingly, with devotion. Then we are happy. We are perfectly situated. But if we decline, I don't want to serve Krishna, then what do you want to do, sir? I want to lord over. So that lording over is only possible under illusion, and that illusion exists only in the material world. So, therefore, desiring to lord over and declining to cooperate with the Supreme Lord, the living entity contacts the sum total of the material world called mahatva. The material world, the sum total of this material world, everything material, is the original substance or the energy called as mahatva. This is a technical term. It's called mahatva, the sum total of all material energy. And from this mahatva, from this sum total of the material energy, his false identity with the material world, false identity with the material world means my false ego, your false ego, each person's false ego, each person's ahankara. Ahankara is Sanskrit word. The English equivalent is false ego or false identity. So, the contact of the living being with this Mahatattva or the sum total of the material energy gives rise to a false ego and gives rise to a particular kind of intelligence and then a particular kind of mind and particular set of senses. All these are developed by the living being. And necessarily this is a material ego, a material intelligence, a material mind and a material set of senses. All material. The contact generates this material identity, material intelligence, material mind, material senses. This covers his pure spiritual identity. Originally, we are all spiritual beings, pure spirit. We have our spiritual identity in relationship with Krishna. We have our spiritual senses, our spiritual mind, our spiritual intelligence, our spiritual identity as loving servitor of Krishna. But all that is covered when we come in contact with this Mahatattva, when a covering is generated suitable for the lording over. Now, by this yogic process, particularly the Ashtanga Yoga process or any yogic process, when his pure identity is realized in self-realization. Self-realization means I realize myself as pure spiritual identity, completely apart from this material body, means material senses, apart from the material mind, apart from the material intelligence, apart from the material ego. I am pure spiritual identity. One has to revert to the original position by amalgamating. Amalgamating means bringing together, combining the 5 gross elements and the subtle elements, mind and intelligence, into the Mahatattva again. It is just like if a potter is making a clay pot. He takes some clay and then he mixes it with water and then shapes it into a pot and then bakes that pot in fire. It becomes a pot. Now the pot is used, and when the pot is destroyed, what happens? The elements which went into making the pot are all separated. Fire is separated, then water is separated, and the earth as clay goes back to the earth. Similarly, when we come in contact with this mahatva, the pure spiritual soul, then we take little false ego, little material intelligence, little material mind, little material senses, and then the material covering called the gross and the subtle body is prepared, and that becomes a dress for the spirit soul, for the living being, material dress. But self-realization means we don't require this material dress, because it's the cause of all our material problems in this material existence. Repetition of birth and death, false understanding, false identity, all kinds of material, misconceptions, material, miseries, material, material existence itself is completely unnecessary, anartha. So, becoming free from this material existence means becoming free of these coverings. So, the covering is given up, and the elements go back to the mahatva from which we had taken earlier in the beginning, whenever we contacted mahatva. Thus, getting freed from the clutches of the mahatva, he has to merge in the existence of the super soul. When we become free from the mahatva, then what is left is the spiritual identity, or the spiritual soul, spirit soul, in its pure identity is left behind, and that has to merge into the super soul. Merge means become one. And what does this becoming one actually mean? In other words, Prabhupada says, he has to realize that qualitatively he is non-different from the super soul. It doesn't mean that I become the super soul. Merging into the super soul here does not mean I become the super soul. No. Always my identity as servant of the Supreme Lord, and Supreme Lord's identity as the master of everyone eternally remains. That never changes. That never is lost, never is at any time lost. It always exists. So, realizing the oneness, qualitative oneness means one in quality. I am spiritual by nature. Super soul or Krishna is spiritual by nature. But Krishna is master, I am servant. So, non-different means not that the servant becomes the master. No, servant will never become the master. Master will never become the servant. Master is always master eternally. Krishna is always the master eternally. And all the living entities are eternally servants. Jivera Swarupo Nityera Krishnadasa. So, realizing the qualitative oneness means I am pure spiritual personality, and that pure spiritual personality is eternally the servant of Krishna. What kind of servant? Loving, devotional servant. And when this qualitative oneness is realized, freed from the Mahatattva coverings or material coverings, one transcends the material sky. You rise above the material sky, material existence, and in the pure spiritual intelligence becomes engaged in transcendental loving service of the Lord. So this is explained here by Srila Prabhupada, what happened to Dhritarashtra. I'll stop here. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.